I want to begin my talk by, as Michael alluded to, talking about my own experience, reflecting about my journey from Gettysburg, where I graduated in 1995, to the present in New York City, and maybe offer some tidbits. There's no roadmap for students, but maybe my own journey might illuminate some possibilities for the students here. And I want to emphasize 2 points. The importance of building a community and the importance of seeking out resources for professional development. Building a community, why building a community? Because frankly, being a historian is lonely. And I remember, Michael, 1992 on campus here, Eric Foner, the distinguished Columbia University historian, won the Fortenbaugh Prize. He was to deliver the lecture here on November 19th. A few students, myself included, and Michael, you were there. We had lunch with Eric Foner in the Cub, I believe. And a student just asked him, so what's it like to be a historian? And that's what he said, it's lonely. By definition, you write, you research, you read in solitude. And that really stuck with me, and it really reinforced to me the importance outside of building a community of friends and colleagues. And for me, that meant finding a mentor here on campus. And I found my mentor, Michael Berkner. Was the pivotal figure in my career here at Gettysburg from 1991 to 1995. The class, in particular, historical methods, transformed me from someone interested, passionate about history into a young professional historian. I think it was the beginning of my career to learn about methods and different approaches to studying history, to read classic essays by the likes of Carl Becker and E.H. Carr, to learn about historiography, a term that I hadn't been familiar with. Oh, okay, so historians debate, discuss, disagree about the past, different interpretations. And that was all so fascinating to me. It captivated me. And to learn oral history, we did a project on Adams County where we interviewed folks about their experience living here during World War II. And it just reinforced to me the idea that everyone has a story to tell, everyone has a story worth sharing, worth recording, and that inspired me. I went on ultimately to take the Eisenhower Seminar here on campus with Michael senior year. And again, this was a watershed moment for me. I think Michael reinforced to me the importance that research on some level should be personal. And in fact, at the time, he was writing a book on his hometown, Bergenfield, New Jersey, about 20 miles or so from New York City. And he obviously had a personal interest in the subject. And as I was thinking about a topic for the Eisenhower, my senior seminar paper, I thought, well, of course, now it's obvious to me. The Eisenhower administration's response to the 1956 Hungarian uprising. After all, I was a child of that. Both my parents fought, participated in the Hungarian uprising of 1956. So on one level, yeah, it was personal to me. And so, students, as you're thinking about topics for your own senior seminar, sure, it should be intellectual, and hopefully you can maybe break new ground in your research. But that personal element, I would really emphasize as being crucial to your own development. I got support from the Pew Foundation to do research at the Eisenhower Library in Abilene, Kansas, immerse myself in the archives. And again, it was eye-opening. And this is my point about seeking out resources to improve, to give you better opportunities to strengthen your own work. Also at Gettysburg, I worked at the Civil War Institute during summers from 1993 to 1995. One great moment, and these kinds of things happen serendipity at conferences and other forums. I'm walking across campus from where the Civil War Institute took place. It was in the astronomy building. What's that building called? The Science Center? Okay, yeah. So I'm escorting great historians here, participating, delivering papers. Howard Jones, a diplomatic historian from the University of Alabama, striking up a conversation, asked me in 1994, so what are you planning on doing after graduation? I said, well, of course I'm going to apply for graduate schools. I want to be a professional historian like you. He said, well, you ought to apply to the University of Alabama. I said, really? Yeah, I hadn't even considered it. I hadn't considered it, but I did. Lo and behold, I got a full scholarship to go there for my master's degree. And it was just, that was the spark. You put yourself in these situations, have these conversations, grab a cup of coffee after a conference presentation. These things happen. And I was so fortunate to meet Howard Jones here at the Civil War Institute in 1994. I went to Alabama, Tuscaloosa, took courses with a legendary historian there, Forrest McDonald, a great historian of the Constitution, of Alexander Hamilton. I remember doing papers. I used to still write the Gettysburg Honor Code on my papers in Alabama. We'd have to write, a book a week, and you'd write. And after class one day, he said, brought me up to class, what is this? I said, it's the Gettysburg College Honor Code, and I explained to him what it meant, what it signified, how I believed in it. And he said to me something like, well, if you didn't do anything wrong, why do you have to sign something? This is like McCarthyism, he thought. And that's Forrest for you. He was provocative, he was iconoclastic, he was insightful. More importantly, I took a class on writing with him and his wife, Ellen Shapiro McDonald, and it was an epiphany for me. I thought I was an okay writer, fine, but constructing paragraphs, writing sentences, writing a thesis statement, again, revelations throughout. We workshopped my master's thesis in this course. It became my first peer-reviewed article. And as far as I was concerned, Forrest McDonald, he came from the land of giants. He was that good. He was just something special. But I knew I wasn't going to stay in Alabama because I knew New York City was in my future. I got into the CUNY Graduate Center. And talk about resources, seemingly endless resources in New York City, as Jim Downs will tell you, who went to Columbia University. But also, the competition to get them is fierce. Cutthroat, right, in New York City. And I knew early on I was going to be a New York City historian. I just felt it was my destiny. It was staring me right in the face, gave me a sense of purpose, a sense of clarity. As Michael said, I joined Big Onion walking tours, led thousands of tours, developed a love for public history in the process. So the city became my laboratory. Here we are walking in the Lower East Side talking about tenements and housing, religious institutions, talking about public space, talking about the decline of manufacturing in Soho, the rise of an artist neighborhood. All of these interesting transitions and using buildings as pedagogical tools, which is what I did in my own courses. I taught for many years at Lehman College in the Bronx, at Hunter College in Manhattan. CUNY grad students, we do a lot of teaching. So I was able to make these tours a part of my own curriculum again. And at the CUNY Grad Center, I took classes with the likes of Jim Oakes, David Nassau, Thomas Kestner, Josh Freeman. These guys are titans. They, played hardball. They weren't pussyfooting around, any of them. They held me to the highest standards. I remember Jim Oakes saying, look, you need to have a neurotic obsession to complete a dissertation, with a topic, to answer a question. And it's not something you do casually. And I said, yeah, he was right. He was right about that. There was a lot of struggle, a lot of anguish in this process, even self-doubt. But, you persevere, you have the right community, you have the right support, and you get through. And it actually, the walking tour set me up well because I was thinking in terms of neighborhoods. I wrote my dissertation on Greenwich Village in the 1950s and 60s. And that benefited me too, as I was interviewing for a postdoctoral position at the Museum of the City of New York. The executive director of the museum said, well, look, in the pipeline we have an exhibit on the folk music revival in New York City. And I said, great, that's the fourth chapter of my dissertation. Let's, and I got picked for the position, curated this, and again, it expanded my skill set as a historian, which I encourage you to think about, doing public history, museum studies. engaging audiences with artifacts, posters, flyers, musical instruments in this case, handwritten lyrics, audio material. In the process, I developed a relationship with singer-songwriter Eric Anderson, who came of age in Greenwich Village, a contemporary of Dylan, Phil Oakes, Tom Paxton. He actually was doing an album inspired by the novels and essays of Albert Camus. Said, hey, you want to co-curate a festival on Albert Camus? I said, sure, absolutely, sign me up. Two people I would have co-curated a festival on in terms of literary figures was George Orwell and Camus. I read The Plague here on campus on my own. It was just, yeah, again, another epiphany. And that was a great experience too, bringing the essays, the novels of Camus to public audiences, 13 events in the city. At this point, I was also on the job market for a tenure track position. The job market was absolutely terrible, miserable. I mean, even almost non-existent, I would say. No, there were a few, but it was scarce. I don't even think Herodotus would have done well on that market. I landed at LaGuardia and Wagner Archives in LaGuardia Community College and New York City History Archives. I was a good fit. I had the opportunity to curate an exhibit on Queens LGBTQ history based on the papers of Daniel Drum, who was the co-founder of the Queens Pride Parade. And since then, I've really been focused on New York City politics and LGBTQ civil rights related issues. So in short, I would just stress to you the importance of building community, of seeking out resources, taking advantage. And, you know, I want to say that in today's climate of researching and teaching history is highly contentious, characterized by political polarization. There are academic and institutional challenges. There are evolving ways of public engagement. The federal government is engaged in a propaganda campaign to push forward a celebratory, uncritical narrative to bolster this presidential administration. And so we need you out there. We need you out there more than ever before to encourage critical thinking. We need you to enrich the public conversation. We need you to teach classes. We need you to research in the archives, write essays for academic and public audiences, to publish books, to curate exhibits, to create websites, to develop podcasts, to start oral history projects, to work in historic preservation, to lead walking tours, to produce documentary films, to mentor students, and to deliver public talks like this one. So it's a good segue into today's conversation, today's talk. My title, Where Have All the Protest Songs Gone? Of course, I'm borrowing from Pete Seeger's 1955 song, anti-war song, Where Have All the Flowers Gone? My answer to this question is the protest songs are still with us. They can be found on alternative spaces on the internet, amplified by social media, but they're not as prominent as they were in the 1960s during the civil rights movement. And this is an image from the civil rights movement in 1960 in Virginia, at Virginia State University in Petersburg. The man strumming the guitar is a crucial figure, Guy Carawan. He's with students, faculty, staff, religious figures on campus at Virginia State. And to me, it really illuminates, epitomizes so much of the civil rights movement. Singers were organizers. Organizers were singers. There was little or no distinction. And really to understand, I think, the importance of the civil rights movement, music integrated effectively, essentially into the civil rights movement, we have to go back to Highlander School in Tennessee. Highlander School, significant institution. It was founded in 1932 by Presbyterian minister Miles Horton and others. It was an adult education and leadership training center for union organizers during the Great Depression. It was a focal point of the labor movement. Highlander organized workshops for activists to help empower historically oppressed groups with few resources. The fundamental goal was to reduce class and racial inequality. Highlander teachers emphasized to their students, activist students at the school, the importance of building coalitions and budding movements. And above all, Highlander instructors stressed the importance of developing activist organizations that merged into the fabric of the community, that weren't set apart but merged within, and this would help fuel the movement as opposed to people from the outside coming in, imposing their ideas in ways, but merging within the existing fabric. And I want to amplify some of these points here and make reference to, again, go back to Guy Carawan, who is really the crucial figure, a significant figure, folk singer, became musical director at Highlander in 1959. Guy Carawan long had an interest in blending vernacular songs, folk songs, songs of the people, with progressive politics, fusing music and activism. In classes, workshops, conferences, and other forums, Carawan taught activists a new genre of music, freedom songs. Freedom songs rooted in African American gospel traditions and church services. Carawan worked closely with the organization SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, emerged in 1960. He was a performer. He was not so much a performer looking to refine his own skills, but rather a song leader at Highlander, working now with civil rights activists, young activists in SNCC and other organizations, intent on finding material that groups of people like to sing together. He was very conscious of cadence, of rhythm, of tempo. How do these voices sound together if we sing a song together? How do we sound together? What's the sensibility of a group when we sing together? What are the feelings generated by the act of collective singing? Let's make music together in a manner similar to the African American church. Songs that expressed moral righteousness, based in African American traditions of spirituals, of Christian hymns. So again, this importance of merging into the fabric of a community seeking civil rights. Carawan wrote a letter to Mo Ash, executive director of Folkways Records in New York City, observing in 1959, there is such great potential here for developing a program around folk music and to make the integration movement in the South into a singing movement. And this was the ideal of Carawan and of people like Pete Seeger, a singing movement, music that was essentially integrated, not as window dressing, not in a cosmetic way, but it becomes essential. And these freedom songs, well, they should be, and they're characterized by simple melodies, by repeating choruses, by leader and response singing, conducive to mass singing. What were some of them? Some of them were "This Little Light of Mine," "We Shall Not Be Moved," "Keep Your Eyes on the Prize," and most famously, "We Shall Overcome." "We Shall Overcome," like folk songs, and Tim Shannon, talks about this in his own methods class, assigning work by Alan Lomax of the Library of Congress, and getting a sense of the evolution of music as a cultural custom, not so much as an art per se, but music, the evolution of music. And like most folk songs, "We Shall Overcome" had a complex history. The origins were unclear. Most folklorists agree that it was initially called "I Will Overcome." It was first copyrighted in 1901 by African-American Reverend Charles Tindley. And there were textile strikes, labor strikes in the 1920s in the South. Strikers modified the I to the collective we, so "I will overcome" becomes "we will overcome." In 1945, 1946, there was a strike at a cigar factory in Charleston, South Carolina, led by mostly African-American women, again saying "we will overcome" to emphasize the collective we. And they were connected to Highlander. Those striking factory workers in Charleston went to Highlander and taught the song to the wife of the founder of Highlander, Zilphia Horton, who then published the song, We Will Overcome. She changed the tempo, slowed down the tempo, added additional verses. And then Pete Seeger becomes aware of the song. Pete Seeger, closely connected to Highlander, changes the lyrics from We Will Overcome to We Shall Overcome. Well, We Will Overcome had some alliteration, but the I in will is weak and it's hard to sing. And when you say shall, your mouth opens. So We Shall Overcome is better for singing in a group and becomes more effective and more poignant. And ultimately, the song was copyrighted in 1963 by Zilphia Horton. Frank Hamilton also worked at Highlander, Guy Carawan, and Pete Seeger to protect it from commercial exploitation. But the funds raised, the proceeds went to civil rights organizations, and it became the unofficial anthem of the civil rights movement, of course. We Shall Overcome. So many examples. LBJ, President Johnson, used the phrase after bloody violence at the march from Selma to Montgomery in an address to Congress. He said, We shall overcome. It was Martin Luther King, his final sermon in 1968 in Memphis, cited some of the lyrics. It was sung at the March on Washington in August 1963 by Joan Baez to an audience of about 300,000 people. I mean, it became ubiquitous. And we have the emergence, the formation of SNCC Freedom Singers in 1962. Again, SNCC formed originally in 1960 after the sit-in in Greensboro, North Carolina. And this isn't the original group. This is from 1965 in Harlem. But the original SNCC quartet traveled thousands and thousands of miles singing the songs and freedom songs on college campuses nationwide. So again, the song became pervasive and a powerful song. And again, we see the integration of music effectively into the civil rights movement. It fostered solidarity, brought people together, and it would become essential. And this is where Bob Dylan enters the picture. And partly this talk is inspired by the film A Complete Unknown, which came out on Christmas Day 2024. I'm sure many of you saw the film starring Timothée Chalamet about Dylan's ascent from 1961 to 1965 in Greenwich Village and at the Newport Folk Festival. This, of course, was a milestone album, his second album, The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. Here he is with his girlfriend, Susie Rotolo, who was actually a member of the civil rights organization CORE, who was a red diaper baby, daughter of communist parents from Queens, New York. They're on Jones Street in Greenwich Village. A mix of personal material, political material, of course, famously Blowin' in the Wind becomes an anthem in the 1960s. Masters of War, what a song, right? I mean, a scathing critique of American foreign policy during the Cold War. The military-industrial complex really evokes the Port Huron Statement by the New Left, by Students for a Democratic Society. Masters of War. Topical songs like Oxford Town about the attempt to integrate Ole Miss in 1962, Talking World War III Blues, a satire of Cold War anxieties. 1963, the album released by Columbia Records, again, a pivotal moment in Dylan's career, represented his deepest involvement in the civil rights movement. And I'm not suggesting here that he was on the front lines of the civil rights movement, on the vanguard, but to be sure, he performed at a voter registration rally in early July 1963 at Greenwood, Mississippi, alongside of Theo Bickel, folk singers Theo Bickel and Pete Seeger. So he played at fundraisers for civil rights at the City College of New York for CORE, for example, around this time. At the Newport Folk Festival, this is a premier venue, right? And you saw this in the film. If you saw the film, he played together with Pete Seeger. Again, Pete Seeger had high hopes and expectations for Dylan. Dylan would succeed Woody Guthrie as the next great voice of the people, the voice of the oppressed. You can see how, seemingly earnest Dylan is here. And that was really the spirit. July 1963, right? Next month, that we're going to have a march on Washington in Washington, D.C. Seeger, again, with the SNCC Freedom Singers. So this is really the spirit of it. And on one of the final nights, the final night of that 4-day festival in July 1963, Dylan really stole the show, I have to say. He sang a lot of political material from Freewheelin', and that really reinforced his image as a protest singer, and we know he hated that label, but he sang a lot of political material. He sang in his finale, Blowin' in the Wind, and he brought up on stage, look at this, from left to right, Peter, Paul, and Mary, who actually made Blowin' in the Wind a national hit before Dylan himself did, right? Peter, Paul, and Mary, based in New York City. Joan Baez, of course, obviously a prominent figure. Dylan, the 4 SNCC Freedom Singers, Pete Seeger, and Theo Bickel. Then after they did Blowin' in the Wind, there was an impromptu encore where they sang We Shall Overcome. And linking arms together, and that's typically how folks sang We Shall Overcome. You linked arms together, you swayed back and forth, the crowd joined in. There was really no distinction between performers and audience because it was very communal. That was the nature of the folk music revival, the civil rights movement. And, some people call it the apex of the folk music revival. Look, you can see it's intergenerational on stage, it's interracial, an incredible moment, and it just sort of reinforces this notion of Dylan as a political figure, only strong, even more reinforced by the release of his next album in 1964, The Times They Are A-Changing. Again, he's capturing the zeitgeist here of a nation going through momentous change. The title of the album, the most popular song, of course. There's a lot of political material here, topical songs about specific individuals, the Ballad of Hollis Brown, to name one example, The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll. Hopes were high for Dylan at this point. And you could be forgiven if you thought that Dylan was a protest singer. Many people did. The Newport Daily News reported, oh, Dylan, he's the voice of the oppressed. He was starting to distance himself from this in 1964, though. Later on, this is July 64. Remember, this is Freedom Summer, where hundreds of Northern college students are going down to register African Americans in the South. So again, the importance of the civil rights movement. The Civil Rights Act was signed about this time. So again, this was the spirit. Dylan, though, take a look at him. He's wearing his a turtleneck, suede jacket. He's wearing jeans, cowboy boots, kind of looking hip and stylish, modish, straight out of a London subculture. Performed pretty nonchalantly on stage. He was well received, warmly received. You can see the smile on Seeger's face. But there were people taken aback because he didn't play any political songs in 1964. The movie got it wrong. The movie had him playing The Times They Are A-Changing at Newport in 64. He didn't do that. He played mostly political, mostly non-political, introspective material. And one of his critics, Irwin Silver from Sing Out magazine, a leftist folk magazine, a leader of the leftist wing of the folk music community, wrote an open letter to Dylan in Sing Out later in 1964, following in Newport. He wrote, and I quote, "I saw at Newport how you had somehow lost contact with people. It seemed to me that the paraphernalia of fame were getting in your way. Your new songs seem to be all inner-directed now, inner-probing, self-conscious, maybe even a little maudlin or a little cruel on occasion." So there's this concern that Dylan, and this is amplified by his next album, it's called Another Side of Bob Dylan, that was released at the end of 1964. That's what he was performing in July 64 from his forthcoming album. 1965, again, the movie focuses and it becomes mythologized. He's rehearsing with the Paul Butterfield's blues band, the electric blues band based in Chicago. On the left, that's Mike Bloomfield playing the electric guitar. Again, Dylan looks completely different than he did, very stylish and hip. That's Al Cooper on the organ. He just released the album a couple months before, Bringing It All Back Home. Half of it was acoustic, half of it was electric. And that night, right, and this is the famous moment, Dylan goes electric at Newport in 1965, played a set with the Paul Butterfield Blues Band, starting with Maggie's Farm, Like a Rolling Stone, and then the song, It Takes a Lot to Laugh, It Takes a Train to Cry, electric. And we know there were boos, but this has really been distorted, frankly. The issue was the microphones on stage were turned down, the amplifiers were turned up for the musical instruments, so the noise was blaring, it was loud, it was distorted, it was of poor quality. His set was rather short too, only 3 songs. The audience was expecting more, 17,000 people. And depending on where you were, in the front, in the middle, the back, you had a different, you heard different things. It was a different experience for you. So there were some boos, probably because of the short set, probably because of the poor song quality, maybe because he played electric guitar. But yeah, we know this is going to be a real turning point, and I think this is really the reason that Pete Seeger was so disheartened, not because he was playing electric music and he was a sellout, but rather he was drifting away from politics, which people had expected him to continue with, given freewheeling in the times they are changing from 63 and 64. But of course, Dylan was not beholden to any cause. He was an artist. He had complete autonomy, and he was very individualistic. Seeger, by contrast, thought that the function of music was to build community based on egalitarian principles. That's why we do music. We do music, we sing together, we sing as a group, we have conversations, we break down barriers, we change sensibilities, we make change. It wasn't so much you listen to a song and engage in a reform movement, but it was a lengthy process. And that's what Seeger was much more communalistic, Dylan was individualistic, and it's a classic conflict in American history. And again, it really did irritate many people, though, on the left. And this, again, from Sing Out magazine, I quoted Erwin Silber before as a critic of Dylan, just to give you a sense of what the potential, I'll read it to you for folks in the back. The political folk song belongs to all of us, and maybe if more of us exercised our rights in using it and developing it, we would be helping to make America a better place to live. So this faith in music, this faith in the arts, of bringing people together, again, of breaking down hierarchies, of changing social sensibilities, was powerful in the 50s, and especially in the civil rights movement. That was really the gold standard. Of course, protest songs continued after, as I suggested in my introduction, and you can't think of the Vietnam War and protests without thinking of some of these, just listing a few famous ones, right? Barry McGuire, Eve of Destruction. This was from 1965. The Animals, We've Got to Get Out of This Place. They made this song popular. It became very popular with American soldiers. Creedence Clearwater Revival, Fortunate Son, about the injustice of the draft. It really spoke more to the unfairness of class, that wealthy young men could take advantage of their resources and avoid the draft, whereas working class men did the brunt of the fighting. The whole rich man's war, poor man's fight, sort of like the Conscription Act of 1863, right? And that contributes to the Civil War draft riots in July 63 in New York City. Anyway, I'm drawing a parallel. Give Peace a Chance, John Lennon and Yoko Ono from the Plastic Ono Band in 1969. All of these powerful songs, catchy lyrics, you can sing on them together, or at least the choruses. And this continues in the 1970s and 80s. I'm just citing a few examples. There are so many more, to be sure. Helen Reddy, the Australian singer, I Am Woman. celebrates female empowerment, becomes a feminist anthem for women's liberation, second wave feminism in the 1970s. On the right, Billy Joel, Allentown, about the decline of manufacturing in Allentown, in the Rust Belt in general, in eastern Pennsylvania, Lehigh Valley, against the backdrop of the demise and closure of Bethlehem Steel, really illuminates the deindustrialization of the Rust Belt. Public Enemy, Fight the Power from 1989, poverty, discrimination, police brutality, became part of the soundtrack of Spike Lee's film, Do the Right Thing. The more recent decades, Green Day ridiculed, mocked the American invasion of Iraq in 2003 with Holiday. On the top right there, Kendrick Lamar with All Right, 2015, on police brutality. There's also an expression of hope and resilience in his song, becomes an anthem during Black Lives Matter. Your Power by Billie Eilish during Me Too. Critical of powerful men exploiting vulnerable women, a plea for them to stop abusing their authority. So yeah, these are just a few examples here. But I would say that these post-60s movements, they boasted hard-hitting songs to be sure, but they never integrated collective singing like the civil rights did at the grassroots level. The lyrics were surely progressive, catchy melodies, but the music didn't come from the people. It came from the top down rather than the bottom up. It wasn't integrated. Remember, this is Highlander, to integrate activism into the fabric of the community. This is musicians performing in front of crowds, not in a communal sense. And today, of course, since the rise of the internet, politically engaged audiences have turned more to social media for news than to protest songs for messages. We know this. We know activists use Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X to disseminate their views. English singer, songwriter, and political activist Billy Bragg explained this at a talk at the Library of Congress a few years ago. He said, quote, "Music has lost its vanguard role in youth culture. With the advent of social media platforms, why go through all the trouble to learn an instrument and have to stand up in front of people? To learn to play the guitar, to write a song, to write a good song, to play effectively, to engage an audience. I can just go and post on social media." This is a digital world of echo chambers that reinforce existing beliefs. Some videos of protest songs may gain millions of views, but the music doesn't establish this emotional connection with the masses of people and becomes embedded in the cause. We don't have singing movements like we used to. And maybe in conclusion, the civil rights movement was the gold standard. It was an anomaly in the venerable tradition of modern protest music. Freedom songs emerged from African American gospel traditions. There was no gulf between song and audience. Freedom songs were simple, direct, and clear, and above all, easy to sing in large groups. As Martin Luther King reflected, they invigorate the movement in a most significant way.